Have you ever wondered, why do people like to wear masks on Halloween? Is it to hide fear, or to avoid being recognized by something that saw your face from a previous Halloween? A year ago, a man was burned alive in the middle of town. No one remembered his name. They only called him by a nickname, the Pumpkinhead. And a year later, he returned with a pumpkin head that no longer held candlelight, only ash and prophetic drawings made by the hand of a surviving child. Welcome back to Whisper Horror Channel, where curses are told not by mouth, but by silence, by fire, and sometimes by the red of crayon melting from a child's nose. If this is your first time here, hit subscribe, comment below the name of the first person you ever thought was innocent, and share this story with anyone who still lights candles on Halloween night without knowing someone is standing behind the door, wearing an empty head, because tonight we will retell the story that was burned away last year. A little girl, a prophecy in pictures, and someone whose name should never have been forgotten. That Halloween, no one remembered the crumbled candies in orange tissue paper bags, nor did anyone mention the lively costume games that once echoed throughout every street and alley. That year, only the memory of desperate screams, distant bells stained red with mist and blood, slowly etched themselves into the hearts of an entire small town named Thornfield, a trace that no amount of winter could erase. The town nestled behind low hills, surrounded by bare maple forests and old roof-tiled wooden houses. That evening was colder than usual, thick fog clinging to every glistening brick step, pumpkin lantern lights flickering hidden among children dressed as witches, vampires, ancient mummies and fairy tales. Windows were tightly shut yet couldn't block the lingering laughter, the knocking of trick or treat. It felt as though a new Halloween, full of surprises, awaited in a place where everyone thought they were most familiar, but the surprise that year no one wished for. From the outskirts, where the Thornfield family home hid beside cold grey apple trees, a piercing scream suddenly tore through the air. At first someone thought it was just a scare, someone joked. Then a second scream, so intense it lost all human semblance, echoed, causing a street lantern to fall and shatter. Neighbors rushed frantically towards the wooden gate, their costume cloaks fluttering in the wind. Some young people wearing masks even laughed, typical Thornfield folk, loving a good scare, until they caught the scent of pungent smoke, mixed with the metallic smell of blood, and a sharp acrid paint odor stinging their nostrils. Something unidentifiable, both putrid and real, like a nightmare. The Thornfield's door swung open, revealing a scene no one had ever imagined. On the living room floor, wooden stained and darkened by rain and wind, lay three bodies: the mother, the father, the tall, slender older brother, all sprawled out, faces contorted in ultimate fear, eyes wide open staring up at the soot-stained ceiling, blood trailing in an unbroken circle, and in the center, a pumpkin drawing made with their own blood. The walls were splattered with strange cuts, bizarre red paint marks. The space was filled with darkness, the rustle of the wind, and a sense that everyone understood this tragedy could not be undone. The ambulance siren tore through the heavy air. Police, neighbors, both old and young, crowded in, purely out of curiosity, then stood frozen like fossils, no one having time to mourn. In the darkened bedroom, a police officer discovered the closet locked from the inside. "Come out, it's all right, child." Under the flashlight beam, a pair of wide round eyes, reflecting a faint light, peered from a crack. The Thornfield girl, the only survivor, her hair matted with sweat, her small hands covered in dirt and blood, sat huddled, trembling uncontrollably. She didn't cry, didn't scream, only stammered one sentence: "The Pumpkinhead killed them." Police stared at each other, unsure whether to pick up the little girl, or just let her sit there until she woke from all her nightmares. The kids in shock, just imagining things, someone whispered, but no one dared to loudly utter the name of that entity in the cold room again. The grim news spread like a great wave across the small town. The next morning, everyone whispered, "The costumed killer is still among us." From the corner of the church, a homeless man named Emmanuel, gaunt and living quietly behind the yard, was suddenly pointed out. It was him. He was asking for candy at the Thornfields last night. No one needed proof. The crowd gathered, eyes fermenting with fear and judgment. No one heard his weak pleas, nor did anyone need to investigate. They caught him, beat him, tied him up, threatening and cursing, forcing him to confess just to be spared. Finally, Emmanuel knelt, tears mixed with blood and brown earth, only able to call out in despair. That afternoon, amidst roaring shouts and flickering flames, A makeshift pyre of decaying wood rose from a barren patch of ground. They shoved an empty pumpkin over his head. His neck cracked, the pumpkin shell splitting grotesquely. A mocking smile then tied Emmanuel to the stake. Fire erupted, blazing red in everyone's eyes. Emmanuel screamed and begged, until his voice merged with the black smoke and vanished completely. That night, over Thornfield's sky, only ash and the smell of charred flesh lingered on the wind, like an unnameable warning. After the tragedy, the little girl was taken to the police station. She remained silent when the psychologist tried to question her, her small arms clenched around a pillow, her gaze still lingering somewhere outside the window as if watching a reality no one else could perceive. I saw blood flowing from the pumpkin's mouth. I know he didn't kill anyone. At night she didn't sleep, her small body trembling as if bearing the cold of the entire winter ahead. Sometimes, she would wake up in the middle of the night, crying silently. Nightmares came in waves without warning. Sometime later, a woman named Marla appeared at the police station. Marla had lost her young daughter in a car accident, and her eyes grew darker with every smile. Looking at Lucy, she recognized her own image, a cracked mirror no one could mend. She adopted Lucy and brought her home. From that day on, Marla's house gained small footsteps, but grew even quieter. Lucy never played with dolls, never drew daisies or rainbows like other children. Night after night, the desk silently turned away from the door. Lucy diligently held a red crayon, immersing herself in dense drawings of blood, shadows, dark rooms, and the rough eyes of the pumpkin head. Many nights, Marla stayed awake, listening to the crayons rustling, echoing through the thick, tense air. Once, she quietly looked at Lucy's drawings and was stunned to discover every detail. A blurry father, a fallen mother, a blood-soaked bed, a pumpkin. Every bloodstain matched the crime scene of the tragic night exactly. In the following days, even more bizarre drawings appeared. A man whose body was burned to ashes, standing in a room covered in black fire shadows, jagged red crayon lines tearing across the textured paper, someone's festering smile. Some nights, Marla gathered all the drawings, tore them into shreds, and burned them in the yard, determined to break free from the haunting. But before the embers could be extinguished, she heard scratching at the door in the middle of the night. Lucy sleepwalking, her own hand smearing blood marks on the bedroom wall, eyes wide open, neither dreaming nor awake. Lights flickered strangely, the house cat wailed disconsolately. By morning, the walls were covered with drawings, blood circles, pumpkin faces, inexplicable evidence. Marla tried gently. "If I don't let you draw, you'll really see him." Lucy clung to her mother's shoulder, bursting into tears. A rare occasion, she cried aloud, then solemnly picked up the crayon again, diligently continuing to draw her nightmares. Over time, Lucy became more withdrawn, her tiny shadow seemingly merging with the room itself, the bloodstains, the pumpkin's gaze on the wall never drying. Every time the town mentioned Halloween, Marla grew paler, and the children in the streets avoided Lucy, both curious and gossiping. Lucy's strange condition gradually became a curse hanging over every family's roof. A year after that night, the festival returned to Thornfield. Winter wind whistled through torn tin roofs, relighting the pumpkin lanterns that stood out in the street. But no one dared to fully enjoy it. Everyone bowed their heads and hurried past Marla's house, afraid to meet Lucy's eyes, the child who carried the prophecy of blood. That night, Lucy drew a new picture, no longer of her own family. The drawing depicted a strange house, its white roof bright under the mist, a man in a blue shirt visible through the window, his lips pursed into a thin, sad line. Right behind him, the pumpkin head bowed, its hollow smile curving, as if waiting for someone to call out a new name. After that bloody Halloween night, the following days in Thornfield were merely a veneer of weary peace. Winter crept onto every old rooftop with silver mist and biting cold, lingering in every breath of Marla's house. In her small room, Lucy gradually transformed into a shadow, a tiny soul drifting through the days, leaving only traces of drawings no one dared to decipher. Initially, Marla secretly rejoiced when she noticed Lucy drew less blood and pumpkins. On the cold white paper, her foster daughter's small hands colored in open windows, white fences, potted plants dotted with dew, a sloped gravel path leading to the town's north alley. The new drawings carried a gentle, ordinary feel, like a faint ray of late-season sunshine, sometimes making Marla imagine a hope of recovery that belonged to no one but Lucy. However, Lucy always quickly turned her drawings face down. Every night, the desk lamp cast a shadow of the huddled child drawing, the streets outside thick with mist, the church bell chiming bleakly on the distant rooftop. Some nights, Marla woke up, only to hear the red crayon scratching on paper, as if someone was scratching her very soul with their fingernails. "I don't remember what I'm thinking," Lucy murmured as if sleepwalking. "My hand just moves on its own, Mom." Sometimes, finished drawings were hidden, folded at the corner of the desk, so that when she woke up she too would stare at them as if they were strange objects. The number of drawings steadily increased, uncontrollably. Every day, the desk drawer held a few more crumpled papers, sometimes still smelling of damp earth, or with mud stains on the edges. Through each picture, Marla noticed a repetition: a circular stone-paved yard, a porch slightly tilted to one side, plastic streamers tangled in front of the door, a white painted fence with warped and protruding links. These memories, Marla initially dismissed as Lucy's delusions, but the more she looked, the more she trembled. She felt like she had encountered these places somewhere, but couldn't be sure, lurking only in the blind spots of her memory. One afternoon, while taking Lucy for a nutritional checkup, Marla glanced sideways at the Hewitt area in the north. She froze when she saw a house set back deeply in a corner of the forest, a white fence running around it, dusty streamers fluttering, and a stone-paved yard with standing water. Every detail appeared exactly like the series of drawings Lucy had been making all this time. A sudden agitation, a cold feeling creeping up Marla's neck, made her unable to control the stinging confusion in her eyes. That night, Lucy excitedly colored a small dog lying by the door, next to a little girl in a yellow dress, her left arm in a white cast. Marla was stunned when she inquired with the medical staff and was told Mr. Hewitt's daughter just got her arm in a cast last week. "She tripped on the steps, ma'am." All coincidences now clearly surpassed the boundary of randomness. In the following days, Marla quietly walked slowly past the Hewitt house, her eyes quickly glancing at every detail: the bicycle leaning, the waterlogged cactus pot on the steps, the red shoelaces hooked on the fence looking exactly like one of Lucy's drawings from last night. Each overlapping detail made Marla's heart ache. She realized anyone could be drawn into this strange vortex just by a casual glance at Lucy's drawings. One night, Marla asked softly, "Why do you keep drawing that house? Is someone forcing you, Lucy?" Lucy closed her eyes, her small hand caressing the edge of the paper. "I don't remember. I don't think about anything at all. But if I don't draw, my head hurts so much, Mom." The confusion gradually grew into fear. Marla no longer knew whether to believe in coincidence, fate, or some supernatural hand. After a week of deliberation, she finally decided to visit the Hewitt family. Choosing the simplest drawings, meticulously noting details on the back, Marla carried the stack of papers to the stranger's house, knocking on the door with a pounding heart. Mrs. Hewitt welcomed her gracefully, but her eyes seemed to avoid any concern. Mr. Douglas Hewitt was distant, his face taut like a mirror just wiped clean of dust. "We're not interested in superstition," Douglas said quickly, his voice cutting like a cold blade, but his hand resting on the stack of drawings trembled slightly. When he skimmed to the picture of the little girl with her left arm in a cast, his eyes stopped, as if it were just an illusion. Marla returned home, her heart heavier than any gust of early winter wind blowing through the door. Every thought circuit flowed back to Lucy, the little girl still silently drawing. That evening she didn't look at Marla, nor did she call anyone to be her friend or play. Marla sat by the window, painfully watching Lucy's thin shadow in the faded yellow light. Lucy placed a new drawing on the table. This time the Hewitt's porch was silent in the dark. A man in a shirt stood outside the door, his shoulders trembling as if worn by sun and rain day after day. Behind him, for the first time, dimly appeared a pumpkin-headed figure, its hollow smile lurking beneath the garden light in the drawing. "I don't remember what I drew, Mom," Lucy softly said, then quietly curled up on the bed, her breath faint like a hidden wind, not knowing where to hide in this house. That night stretched endlessly, like the icy premonition that all of Lucy's drawings instilled in this house. On the white paper, every detail of the Hewitt family gradually became clearer, each small stroke forming a portrait of destiny, and no one knew if Lucy was a harbinger or just the next victim of some obsession older than Halloween pumpkins. From behind the window, thick winter mist pressed shadows onto the walls, while somewhere deep within Lucy and Marla, an ominous feeling grew by the hour that every drawing the little girl made was not just for herself, but a warning for anyone brave or reckless enough to see it. As winter's cold covered Thornfield's rooftops, along the Hewitt area's alley, windows began to display yellow tape signaling the festival, but in every house anxiety became as distinct as a ghost passing through an unclosed threshold. The first night began with small noises,
No one thought of anything grand or strange, just the creak of wooden frames, the whistling of the wind, and the pang of unease at the back of Rachel Hewitt's neck every time her husband turned the key late in the door. Rachel woke up in the middle of the night feeling someone walk through the hallway. She held her breath and listened. The monotonous tick of a clock, a rather strong gust of wind, then a very faint turning of the doorknob, just enough to disturb all dreams. Rachel looked at Douglas beside her. He had also woken up, grumbling as usual. It's probably just the cats playing. He went straight to the porch, only to find the wooden chair outside the door overturned on the gravel path, hitting the damp stone ground hard. No one was there, no footprints. Douglas set the chair upright, looked around, then slammed the door shut. Inside, Rachel quietly remembered a detail. In the pile of dark drawings Lucy had sent, there was an overturned chair just like that, a figure standing far off to the side, eyes devoid of features. Since adopting Lucy, Marla had quietly peeked through her daughter's room door every night. Tonight, as the golden light settled on the door frame, she was confused to realize Lucy was still sitting upright in her chair, her hand continuously moving on the paper, even though her eyes were tightly shut. It all happened in silence. Lucy drew the familiar house, the window open, the curtains fluttering, and outside a long blurry figure stood still, looking inside. Marla considered shaking her, but was afraid of breaking her sleep. In the morning, Lucy was bewildered, remembering nothing. I just remember I dreamed. I was outside, and also inside, seeing myself but unable to call out. The following days passed quietly with an abnormality hard to name. The Hewitt's cat, normally playful and friendly, now absolutely avoided the main door during the day, hiding on the second floor. At night, it would lie growling in the hallway, its yellow eyes blazing, pointing only towards the stairs, as if detecting something invisible. Rachel hid her fear from Douglas, telling herself everything was a coincidence. One morning, while wiping the windowsill, Rachel discovered the cactus pot placed there was waterlogged and rotten to the root, exactly like a drawing Lucy had made that Marla had sent. This time, Rachel couldn't evade it. She silently opened the drawer, took out old drawings to compare, pressing them together, her heart clenching at the precise matching details, the discolored wall, the swollen plant turning black, the door indifferently catching the fading light. Douglas grew increasingly irritable, appearing more restless than usual as evening fell. He locked all the doors before 9 p.m., even nailing extra bolts, checking hinges, and then getting angry if Rachel asked about it. Once Rachel was stunned when Douglas said, "This town has been crazy since last year. I don't want to go down that road again." Never before had the phrase last year been mentioned explicitly by him. It was always a blind spot to be avoided. Marla was even more surprised when, during a morning check, she discovered Lucy's hands covered in strange gray ash, dry and clinging to her fingernails. It had been raining for several days. The house hadn't used the fireplace, and Lucy hadn't left her room. In the latest drawing, a house's front door was ajar, the porch stained with smudges like small wet ash marks. One unusually calm night, exactly at 3:13 a.m., Rachel woke up to a faint click from the front door. The wind wasn't strong enough, and no one was coming or going. The deadbolt had been disengaged, the door sliding open a tiny crack. Douglas angrily rushed out, slammed it shut, and added 2 more locks. "That's enough, if I catch anyone playing these games." But Rachel didn't dare tell her husband what she really thought. She felt that the image of the ajar door had always appeared in Lucy's drawings beforehand, and Douglas himself had once revealed a fleeting, helpless doubt and a secretly frightened look when flipping through those stained memories. She began to be wary, quietly observing her husband, not speaking of her fear to anyone, because she wasn't sure what she feared more, the lurking shadows outside the porch, the omens from the drawings, or Douglas's increasingly mysterious uneasiness. At the same time, Marla tiredly woke up in the middle of the night, hearing Lucy scream and then slam her hand on the table. "Don't leave the door open. I don't want to see him anymore." Entering the room, she only saw Lucy had fallen back asleep, tear stains still on her cheeks. On the table, the small hand pressed on the drawing, the red crayon mark extending from the steps to the door frame. In the drawing, a man stood blocking the doorway, and behind him a ghostly pumpkin head peering in, its wide carved smile seemingly ready to snatch away the figure within. The dark night was silently mottled, but at the Hewitts, the security camera near the door recorded the lock turning slightly again, the door swinging wider than the day before, the silence torn by a brief creak of hinges. There was no wind, no one out there. But behind the bright threshold in the thick darkness, something had just come very close, waiting for just one name to be called, or a sign to fully pour into the lives of the remaining people who thought they were at peace. That feeling, oppressive, lurking, darkness spreading through every crack in the door, made the town, the porches, and every small heart simultaneously flinch. It was time for all doors to open, and not just the Hewitt's front door, but also the invisible thresholds in everyone's own minds, one by one opening for the most ancient fear to step in, unhesitatingly. Part 14, continuing from body. The winter darkness in those short days enveloped Thornfield like a thick blanket meant only to hide dreams that remained chilling. After enduring a stifling atmosphere of silent fear for some time, Lucy's drawings took a completely different turn. Though no one told her, no one guided her, Lucy's hand began to draw human figures, strange male forms gradually appearing in sequences of doors, staircases, porches, and Marla, though accustomed to many anxieties, began to feel a chill deep in her spine whenever she saw these figures. Lucy drew as if it were recounting the inevitable. In a solitary drawing of a grey porch, a man's figure stood silently in the rain, his collar turned up, hands in his pockets, his head bowed, shadowing his face. Marla looked for a long time, then asked in the calmest voice, "Who is that, dear?" Lucy stopped drawing, not looking at her mother, only replying softly, "I don't know, but he's always there." In the following nights, that shadow became clearer. First, an angled stance, broad shoulders in a dark shirt with a small stripe on the sleeve, short hair cropped close to the nape of the neck. Lucy diligently refined the chin, drawing a subtle indentation near the left ear that even she didn't remember ever seeing. At night, Marla startled when examining the drawing. This figure was strangely similar to Douglas Hewitt, from his build to his posture, even the faint, hard-to-detect scar behind his left ear. Unease deepened in her heart. Marla couldn't sleep. One night she received an email from Rachel, Douglas's wife. Hesitant words, apologizing for being polite but superficial last time, because Douglas was upset. Rachel wanted to see more drawings, just to quell an unnamed urge. Marla carefully sent a few photo files, along with a few unseen tears. 5 minutes later, Marla's phone rang close to midnight. On the other end, Rachel was crying and saying, How did that little girl know Douglas has a scar behind his left ear? I never told anyone, only him and me. A car accident when he was young. Are you sure Lucy has never been to my house?" Marla could only stay silent, her hands cold and trembling on the kitchen counter. From then on, Lucy's drawings became increasingly realistic. One night she drew a section of a staircase with dark wooden railings, a narrow corner with a crooked picture frame. Marla sent the photo to Rachel for verification. Rachel sobbed for a long time before replying, "That picture frame just got crooked after last week's wind. My son hasn't fixed it yet." This meant Lucy was drawing things she had never seen directly. Douglas Hewitt, since noticing his wife's strange behavior, grew increasingly sullen and extremely controlling. He ordered Rachel to delete all photos on her phone, forbade contact with Marla, forbade their daughter from meeting or mentioning Lucy. Every evening, the doors in the house were tightly locked, all curtains drawn, and he sat on the sofa all night, immersed in silence and strong liquor. Rachel gradually grew afraid, but wasn't sure what she feared more, the shadows in the drawings, or the growing darkness between them. Marla, unwilling to give up, quietly spread over 30 of Lucy's drawings from the beginning of the season across the floor. What struck her was the strange immobility of the man's figure. That tall, thin silhouette always stood still, from the door to the hallway, the porch, never changing its position. Always one figure, faceless but possessing all the details Douglas had. One night, Lucy sat quietly at her desk, her eyes tired. Her hand trembled as she drew the bowed figure, but then with a very slow movement, Lucy added 2 dark streaks, eyes. Not ordinary eyes, but deep hollow sockets, empty as burned ash, yet intense and directly staring at the viewer. When Marla looked, she felt a chill down her spine, the feeling of being truly watched, right in her own house that she cleaned every day.
The next night, during Rachel's upstairs camera check, Douglas unexpectedly appeared, ransacked the closet, and discovered the stack of drawings Marla had secretly sent. He snatched them, immediately deleted them from his phone, then looked at Rachel for a long time. "If you believe that nonsense more than you believe me, I don't think we're married anymore." Rachel quietly buried her face in her pillow. As night fell, she secretly looked at an old wedding anniversary photo. Douglas from 15 years ago also had that hidden look, then mysterious, now something both sinister and fragile. At Marla's house, Lucy suddenly sat bolt upright in her sleep, crying and screaming, "Not his real face, not his real face, Mum." Marla hugged her daughter, damp with tears and the smell of fearful sweat. On the table, a new drawing appeared, the man's face torn away in a large section, his mouth gaping like peeled skin, but his eyes remained, staring fixedly at Marla, as if trying to prove their existence. On the last night of the month, Lucy drew the strangest picture yet. A man sitting opposite a dining table, his collar disheveled, one hand holding a wine glass, the other hand slightly curved on the table. Behind him, on the wall, a real pumpkin shadow clearly appeared, no longer blurred, but sharply carved, each line of the smiling mouth, a large sharp smile ready to devour the person in front of it. Marla looked at the drawing, her heart filled with a near despairing feeling. All her foster daughter's drawings had surpassed coincidence, reaching the very core of a warning no one dared to look at directly. In her eyes, everything seemed to merge into one. Douglas's shadow, the gaze from the drawing, Rachel's fear, Lucy's small hands, and the pumpkin's smile, all looking towards a fateful night, where all destinies were bound together by a single red thread. On the living room floor, the series of drawings silently stretched like a flowing bloodstain, and outside, winter buried screams and fears, preparing for a night when, finally, the figure in the drawing would truly be complete, and that gaze would cross the boundary of the paper to stare directly into the eyes of anyone who dared to look back. Part 15, continuing from body. That winter crept through Thornfield with an ominous gait, covering the eyes of all survivors with an indescribable darkness. The stillness of the small town grew thicker in Marla's house, where Lucy increasingly retreated into silent areas of memory. Children her age had begun to learn new games, while Lucy still stayed in her room, only moving when golden light streamed through the curtains, or when her foster mother placed a stack of white paper in her hand. At first, the drawings were haunting, but this time they weren't predictions for tomorrow. The blurry yellow light illuminated the stairs, and under Lucy's pen were hurried, slanted streaks of blood flowing down the wooden steps. No human figure appeared. Marla, in the quiet night, looked closely. The staircase in the drawing, the spiral railing, the grey stain at the base of the wall, all were exactly like the crime scene diagram the police showed her when filing Lucy's adoption a year ago. Marla's hands trembled as she reopened the old documents, spreading all copies of the diagram on the floor. Every line in Lucy's drawings, the window, the curtain, the bloodstain following the direction of the light, matched the map down to the millimeter. She felt a cold creeping up her neck. Beneath the guise of a child, that memory was not fading. It was simply hiding in a fog of self-preservation instinct. In the following nights, when all the lights were off, in a deep slumber, Lucy often uttered words not meant for anyone living. I'm standing somewhere, but I don't dare to breathe. I see someone dragging something, then blood splatters. I don't scream, I just hide. Each of these words was like a fingernail scratching at the surface of truth, shattering the barrier between nightmare and memory. One morning, Lucy gave Marla a drawing. On the staircase, this time there was a silent figure, holding something like a wooden handle, and behind it were 3 long streaks of blood spreading onto the floor like ghosts drifting in from a distant festival. No pumpkin head, no ghostly smile. When Marla asked, "Who is that person, Lucy?" Lucy shook her head, her eyes lost in the darkness. He has no face, but his eyes glow in the dark. Marla was overwhelmed by fear and realization. Lucy no longer seemed to see the future, but was vividly reliving the terrifying night that had been buried for nearly a year. Unable to bear what she didn't understand, Marla brought the drawings to a child psychologist. The silver-haired doctor pondered for a long time before saying, "Children cannot independently imagine such complex spatial layouts, lighting, or actions if they haven't witnessed them firsthand. This is a blocked memory, and now it's leaking out through drawings as the mind's protective barriers gradually weaken." Sometime later, Marla discovered that on nights when Lucy didn't use a pen, she would sit silently in the dark, her small hand scratching white paper with her own fingernails. When she turned on the light, the rough lines of fingernail scratches formed a figure kneeling on the floor, its entire body stained black and gray like ash. Her fingertips were covered in gray powder with a burnt smell, and her hands had red marks whose origin she didn't know. Late at night, the phone rang. Rachel called, her voice panicked. "Yesterday Douglas had a nightmare," he kept repeating. "I told you she didn't see anything. She was in the closet, she didn't see anything at all." Rachel choked back a sob, pressing, "Who was he talking about, Marla? Who was it that saw something in my house?" Marla froze, fragmented memories, threatening to reassemble into a shattered hole in her heart. Lucy's drawing that evening depicted a dining table, with a man sitting at an angle in the middle, broad shoulders, prominent neck veins. No face, just short hair cropped close to the nape of the neck, and the cluster of indentations behind his left ear, Douglas Hewitt's unmistakable signature. On the table were 3 overturned cups of blood, an empty chair opposite the man. Marla hesitantly asked, "Lucy, are you sure you've never met this person in real life?" Lucy lowered her head. I don't remember his face, but when I look at the drawing, my heart aches. Marla held her daughter close, feeling the loss of control return exactly as when she lost her biological daughter. This time it was the loss of peace for the living. By morning, Lucy didn't go to school, only quietly drew the curtains. She handed Marla a folded drawing, which she had kept strictly for several days. When Marla opened it, her heart stopped. In the middle of a dilapidated living room, a man stood upright, blood splattered on both walls, holding a cracked wooden stick in his hand. The bloodstains no longer metaphorical. The face in the drawing was sharp, deep-set eyes, square jaw, crooked mouth, unmistakably Douglas Hewitt. Not a sound echoed in the living room, only Marla's ragged breathing, her trembling hands wrapped around Lucy. The gaze in the drawing seemed to break free from the paper, staring directly at the mother and daughter, and all those who had once turned their backs on the horror. A chapter of memory had awakened, and this time no one had the right to lull it back to sleep. Part 16. Continuing from body, the second winter in Thornfield brought no white snow, but quietly permeated everything with a layer of warm ash, smelling of burnt wood, and an ancient darkness older than any house. In the small house on the edge of town, Marla watched Lucy draw for 3 straight nights without sleep, her small hands calloused and rough, her red knuckles swollen and oozing dry blood. Lucy didn't complain, didn't leave her desk, bloodstains smearing the paper, leaving marks like a strange offering to some hidden deity. These drawings no longer had a childlike quality. Against a black background was the image of a wooden pyre, flames coiling red like blood, surrounded by motionless figures, their eyes flickering with harsh light. Never before had Lucy's drawings been so heavy, so haunting and so aged, as if her hand was no longer her own. On another page, a man knelt on the ground, his hands tied behind his back, his chest deeply marked with a pumpkin, not on his head, but seemingly branded into every heartbeat. Behind him, a faceless circle of people stood close to the fire, all holding torches. Only Douglas Hewitt stood out, receding into the background, his head bowed, his hand covering half his face. Marla looked at the drawing, uneasiness swirling deeper and thicker than the shadows of all closed doors. Marla took the stack of drawings and quietly walked across town towards the old church. Father Caleb was old, his face gaunter after a long winter with no one coming for confession. When Marla pulled up a chair and spread the drawings on the table, he looked down, his voice raspy like ash. I've never seen such a unified crowd, like a mass exorcism. Only one person stood at the edge, not holding a flame, and that was Douglas Hewitt. But he stared at the pyre, didn't stop it, didn't speak, did nothing at all. Across town in the Hewitt house, Rachel hid Lucy's drawings under the wardrobe. Douglas rummaged, his hands trembling, his eyes bewildered when he saw them. He screamed, swung his hand, shattering the glass frame, tearing the drawings into fragments. I'm not a murderer, I didn't burn him. His scream tore through the house, but in that moment, Rachel sat back silent. What she suddenly understood, Douglas had been there, he had known from the beginning, and he had remained silent. Night crumbled in the shimmering sound of the wind. Marla, while latching the door, faintly heard Lucy talking in her sleep. The little girl sat bolt upright, eyes open but unfocused, her voice whispering but deep, strange as if from the bottom of a well. The first one lied, the first one knew but didn't speak, and all of them threw wood into the fire. Then Lucy collapsed, sweat pouring down her temples, but no one could rouse her from that deep trance. In the new drawing, for the first time names appeared. Below 4 figures standing beside the pyre, faded words were written: Douglas, Mrs. Mathers the shopkeeper, retired police officer James Finch, and Mr. Clay, the man who had amplified the crowd's shouts on the day the town burned, Emmanuel alive. Marla trembled, understanding. The drawings were no longer accusing one person, but summoning the omen of an unavenged spirit. That feeling buzzed throughout the town. The Hewitt's cat died unusually. Lights flickered continuously at 3:13 a.m. Doors opened softly for no reason. Douglas retreated deeper into panic, often muttering to Rachel alone, "It's not the girl, it's the one who was burned. He's back." Marla, in desperation, brought the drawings to Mr. Yule, the old coffin maker living outside the village. Mr. Yule looked for a long time, then said, "This 7-flame circle is an ancient ritual symbol from Salem, exoneration by fire. If they unjustly burned someone and refused to confess, then the fire would not go out until every person present that day was called by name, one by one. That night, Lucy had a high fever.
her hands burning, unable to move. Marla burst into tears when she found a paper covered in black charcoal, the drawing strange as if carved rather than drawn with a pencil. In the drawing, Douglas lay in a burning house, firelight streaming from the windows onto the walls. Outside, 6 remaining figures stood silently waiting, all looking towards the prone figure. No one knew who drew it, but a chilling obsession coiled around every object. Douglas could not sleep soundly. In the middle of the night, steeped in liquor, he sat before the dining table, lit only by a faint light. Suddenly, he heard a sizzling laugh, acrid like burning hair, echoing right beside his ear. Under the table, a drawing trembled uncontrollably. No wind, no one touching it. He turned in panic, seeing the drawing rotate towards him on its own. On the drawing, for the first time, words appeared, charred black, half blurred, but clearly legible. The first one has been marked, and he will not die easily. The ancient fire in the small town was no longer confined to the past. It had become a swirling bloodline in every whisper, every dark corner, every broken dream. Now no one could control the hands that drew the crime, because they did not belong to Lucy alone, but to all who contributed wood, contributed gazes, contributed silence to that pyre that year. And when the hand began to draw again, when the next names appeared under the shadow of fire, when a new circle was about to close, no one was sure they would survive this winter, or if they would again be the one bowing their head in the crowd, to become the next face in the vengeful drawing of a soul that never rested. December winds crept through Thornfield's rooftops, carrying the lingering smell of smoke, the faint ash of ancient festivals. In Lucy's drawing room, the space seemed thick with some metaphysical force. The small girl's hand gripped the pencil tightly, white paper stained with color, dry bloodstains still visible in her fingernails, but this time Lucy's eyes were unusually clear and alert. The drawings were crowded with figures surrounding a fire, and beneath each figure was a faded inscription, D.H., M.L., A.K. Marla quietly compared these initials with old news reports. In the local newspaper, the village's accounts of last year's pyre night were still yellowing in every column of ink. Exactly 7 names, 7 people present at that hasty trial. The man on the loudspeaker yelled punish. The grocery store owner carried wood to the pyre. The police officer sat endlessly at the park's edge saying nothing. Douglas Hewitt, the first to shout get him, was also the one who initiated that deadly spiral. Marla trembled, touching the paper, whispering to Lucy on a heavily misty night, "This isn't blind revenge. These are the ones who must pay the price." In the Hewitt house, Douglas began to feel a strange smell of smoke permeate his very being. He sprayed perfume everywhere, ran fans day and night, but the smell of ash stubbornly clung from his collar, seeped into his chest, soaked into every pillow, every family curtain. Unable to sleep, he sat grimly in the living room at night, sometimes mumbling in his sleep, "She didn't see anything. I locked her in. Don't let her see anything." One morning, Rachel rummaged through a file cabinet and discovered a yellowed invitation, signed by Douglas, printed with the trembling strokes of a time older than even old pride. Clipped with it was a photo, Douglas standing behind the pyre, his hands clenched as if trying to restrain something. Rachel sobbed, realizing for the first time he knew he was wrong, but he remained silent. That evening, realizing Rachel had secretly contacted Marla, Douglas locked all the doors, cut the phone lines. Rachel was confined to the bedroom, lights flickering, windows boarded up. From the outer room, Douglas's voice echoed, thick and guttural, "You're not allowed to drag them in here. They'll leave if you keep silent." That same night, Lucy drew again. Her hand trembled, scratching thick lines onto the paper, yet the drawing remained unbroken. A man tied to a chair, fire rising from his feet. Around him stood 6 faceless figures. On the chest of the bound man, a single word appeared, guilt. Lucy collapsed onto the floor, as if all her strength had left her, just as Marla rushed into the room, hearing a crackling sound. The freshly drawn paper spontaneously caught fire, ash falling evenly from its edges. When the embers died, Marla saw a trace of writing reappear, branded on the surface, "He is the first." Right at that moment, at 3:13, the Hewitt house suddenly caught fire. Screams echoed through the poor dilapidated neighborhood, fire engulfing the roof within minutes. Neighbors rushed to help, but no one could save Douglas from the inferno. Rachel, in a panic, scratched and bleeding, kicked open the back door to escape. When firefighters extinguished the blaze, all that remained of Douglas was a pool of black ash. It was impossible to determine how he died, as the fire seemed to have originated from within, with no external accelerant. Amidst the crumbling ash, firefighters surprisingly found a cracked pumpkin lantern, its embers still glowing faintly inside. No one understood why that object was there. The Hewitts had absolutely no Halloween decorations since the tragedy occurred. The next morning, a strange cold permeated the street. Lucy sat solemnly at her desk, her hand no longer trembling. She colored steadily, the paper silent like an ending ceremony. Below the last drawing, Lucy wrote in tiny lines, "Douglas Hewitt, complete. Next, ML." Marla looked at the initials, her heart aching faintly, then slowly turned towards the window. Outside, the wind swirled ash into long streaks, and it seemed the entire town was suffocated by the smell of unresting fire. That was just the prologue to a series of punishments, whose end no one knew, as the small hand, carrying the haunting injustice of an unjustly burned soul, continued to write the list of sins that needed to be paid. Part 17, continuing from body. Despite the Hewitt house now being a frame of ash, reeking of sorrow, villagers still whispered that the house wasn't truly dead. Night after night, precisely at 3:13, anyone passing by would silently hear shuffling footsteps from the living room to the window, sometimes even the soft click of a latch opening and closing, and the rustle of ash, as if an invisible hand scraped the floor. In the morning, a woman walking her dog stopped abruptly when the animal's nose suddenly drooped, then growled. She bent down. The air around her carried the faint smell of burnt hair mixed with damp ash, cold as a memory unwilling to let go. Rachel, after the incident, sought refuge at her cousin's house, but her soul was completely cut off from any sense of safety. Nightmares grew thicker, assassinating every sleep. Every night, the same scene repeated. Douglas standing in the kitchen, his entire body covered in grey patches, his head a swirling vortex of ash, faceless. Waking up in the morning, Rachel panicked when she saw her hands covered in grey ash clinging to her fingernails. Though she was sure she hadn't touched any fire all night, Lucy was lost in a state of possession difficult to name. Every morning, Marla clearing the table would find scribbled papers, not of human figures but of bizarre words, the trembling hand of a hand older than Lucy's age. I was burned because they wanted to believe what was easier than the truth. I was promised freedom if I stayed silent, but I screamed. Marla flipped through handwriting analysis reports, her heart skipping a beat. This handwriting was identical to that of Samuel Creel, the man who was burned, who had signed his name at the village's charity camp before becoming the town's vengeful spirit. Lucy's drawing shifted to colors of ash and rope. One picture only had a loosely tied, singed piece of rope. Another was ash creeping upwards towards the ceiling like smoke being sucked towards darkness. The window in the drawing was ajar. Sparkling outside were floating white dust motes, as if the soul never truly rested. Marla hit rock bottom in despair. Unable to seek help from anyone, she had no choice but to find her way to the old church, where old Father Caleb lived alone behind the yard. Ever since that pious ceremony was the last day he preached. That afternoon when Lucy stepped into the churchyard, the wind suddenly shifted, disheveling the priest's cassock. Suddenly the church bells all rang at once, no one touching the ropes. Father Caleb trembled as he stepped onto the threshold, then froze, his eyes bloodshot. Lucy looked at him, her voice thin as that of someone exhausted for too long. God's man did not carry a torch, but God's man did not stop them. Father Caleb's tears flowed silently. Marla led Lucy inside. She spread all the drawings on the old altar. Lucy had fallen asleep on a chair, her lips trembling as if in a salty breeze. The nearest drawing depicted a tarnished silver altar, surrounded by torn scripture books at the passage "Forgive those who wrong you." Beside it was a faceless figure, its body seemingly melting into charcoal ash. At that moment, for the first time in an entire year, Father Caleb recounted everything. He had been called to perform an exorcism ceremony on the night of the burning. He knew in his heart there was no evidence to condemn Samuel Creel, a poor carpenter who had once healed people for free. But when the screams echoed, when the crowd roared enough, burn him, he stood silently watching, holding only a crucifix, his shoulders slumped, not daring to move towards the increasingly large flames. Caleb tremblingly pulled an old frayed notebook from a desk drawer. In it, he carefully wrote the man's full name, Samuel Creel, born 1969, wandering carpenter, once saved Mrs. Owens, a stroke last June, suspected of witchcraft for not seeking church permission when helping people. Beside the name was a symbol of a long-standing injustice, extending through all promises no one dared to keep. Finally, Father Caleb sat in deep thought for a long time before saying, "I cannot banish him, but I can call him by his rightful name, and place that name in this sacred place, so he knows." Finally, someone believes, and dares to listen to his story to the very end. Marla gripped his hand, whispering absently, her gaze towards Lucy, who was no longer just Lucy. "We must do this. before all the doors in Lucy and in this entire town close forever. Part 18. Continuing from body. The old church opened its doors after a year of paralysis by the town's shared nightmare, like a silent omen that some things cannot rest until they are called by their rightful name. The dusty wooden pews were hastily wiped clean with straw brooms. New pale white candles were placed somewhere on the altar, though the candle holders still bore the tarnished marks of old ash. 3 bell tolls echoed, reaching all the way to the town square, yet no one touched the old rope. Outside the door, the wind swept through the gnarled trees, gusting heavily with every labored breath of the living. On the cold stone pulpit, Father Caleb placed a dark weathered wooden plank in the center, a piece of wood taken from the pyre once built for Samuel Creel, now transformed into an exhibit and an offering for a ritual no one dared to call an exorcism. They didn't want to banish the darkness, they only wanted to free it from a person's identity. People began to arrive, silent as a flock of birds that had lost their nest, no one speaking a word to another. Mary Ann, the shopkeeper who had carried firewood, quietly sat at the back of the row, her eyes downcast, avoiding all gazes. Albert, the old police officer who had witnessed the burning, hunched his shoulders, sitting close to the pew, his hand gripping his faded baseball cap. The man who had used the loudspeaker that year, a construction worker who built the pyre, and 4 other people, all were there. They didn't look at each other. No one spoke, but everyone's eyes were directed towards the low table, where Lucy had placed the last drawing, carefully wrapped in a grey cloth. Lucy sat alone with her knees hugged, her eyes dark and red as if she had a fever, her hands trembling, unsure if from cold or something deeper than cold. In that stifling atmosphere, Lucy leaned close to Marla's ear, whispering as if afraid the wind would overhear. "If he isn't called by name, then I'll have to draw again. Every time I draw, it's like a piece of my heart is lost, until there's nothing left." Father Caleb stepped onto the pulpit, his skin pale, his hands shaking. He opened the Bible, which had once been torn at a passage about forgiveness, the very torn part now mended with 2 pieces of yellow tape. For the first time in a long year, his hand didn't flinch, and his voice was steady. "Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven." A heavy moment settled upon the church. Suddenly, Albert, the old police officer, sprang up from his seat, his eyes blazing, his voice hoarse as he touched a memory he had avoided his whole life. I knew he wasn't a demon. I stood opposite him when he was tied to the pyre. His eyes weren't angry, he was just afraid. I knew, but I stayed silent. He collapsed back down, covering his face. Mary Ann and the others bowed their heads, no one saying a word. But in that silent atmosphere, the unspoken confession resonated louder than any accusation. Suddenly, Lucy stiffened and sat upright, then fell onto the stone floor. Marla rushed to hold her shoulders. Lucy's eyes were wide open, but the voice that came out was no longer hers. "What is my name? If no one knows who I am, then my drawings will never dry. I still have to draw." A chill flowed back, the wind seemingly carrying the lingering smell of ash and blood everywhere. Father Caleb trembled, then suddenly knelt before the altar, holding the pyre plank. "Samuel Creel," he called out loudly, emphasizing each syllable from deep within his chest. "Samuel Creel, son of Ruth, carpenter of Thornfield Village, unjustly arrested, unjustly bound, burned by the shouts of all of us." As soon as the name was fully spoken, the candles on the altar simultaneously flared up for a moment, then softened. Wind suddenly swept through the rows of pews, no one seeing the door open. Lucy seemed to be pulled upright. Her small frame shuddered for a moment, then the strange light in her eyes gradually faded, returning to weariness and emptiness. Marla tremblingly opened the grey cloth, revealing the last drawing, still faintly smelling of dust. In the drawing, Samuel Creel stood in the old circle of fire, but this time the fire didn't engulf anyone. Samuel wasn't tied, no longer bowing his head in shame. He stood tall, eyes looking straight ahead, hair disheveled with blood. On his hollow cheeks 2 streaks of dried brownish yellow tears. Behind him the pumpkin head had vanished, replaced by the open church frame, light from the window shining deep inside, while the silent figures in the distance all tilted their heads, no faces clear but all looking towards him. At that moment, Lucy, for the first time after a long year of struggle, looked around the church, her voice calm, clear, both tired and relieved. "Now he has a name. I can stop lending my hand to speak for him anymore." Marla burst into tears, though not sad nor exactly relieved. Something was finished, but something would never truly be over. Lucy took the last drawing, walked to the altar, and handed it to Father Caleb. He held the drawing up before the community, his old hand loosely gripping a candle in a wax-stained holder.
Fire licked the drawing evenly, burning neither quickly nor violently, yet the paper didn't blacken, didn't emit smoke, only seemed to dry out from all its dampness. As the paper's color dissolved into the air, white ash scattered on the table, everyone saw one last inscription appear clearly before vanishing in a gentle breeze. I have been drawn. It is enough. The crowd didn't disperse immediately. They stood together for a long time, no one speaking a word. On the stone path leading out of the church, footprints were imprinted on the ground as if covered with a very thin layer of ash. Outside, the season had begun to change. Rare sunlight shone through the clouds, and the wind no longer carried the smell of fire. There, in everyone's heart, silence was no longer a thing to deny guilt, but became a silent prayer for things once forgotten, once done, once ghosts in every sleepless night, now gradually given words and resolved. Outside the threshold, Marla held Lucy close to her chest, the small hand gently stirring the air, silently sending the last dust of charcoal back to the earth, so that justice could finally be called by its human name, for the first time acknowledging what one had done, and allowing that memory to close, not to be forgotten, but because from now on, someone dared to call it out in broad daylight. The morning after the exoneration ceremony, soft sunlight sprinkled on the edge of the blanket, waking Lucy with a taste of peace she hadn't known in a long time. Marla sat beside her, her hand running through her daughter's bangs, asking nothing. Lucy opened her eyes, dreamily asking softly, "Has everyone said his name?" Marla bowed her head, smiling. Without words, Lucy suddenly sighed softly, her eyelids closing. For the first time after so many long nights, the little girl slept peacefully like a seed sinking into golden earth.
The old church was locked again. No more flickering lights. No more prayers. Only the window above the altar was left ajar, letting the wind sweep through the moss-covered stone steps. In the front yard, a wooden plaque silently appeared, with dark hand-carved letters. Samuel Creel, the one who was burned, now remembered by name. Rachel quietly recorded every detail of the truth into a single document. She didn't send it anywhere, just framed it and hung it in her hallway, where visitors always paused, reading for a long time, no one asking questions. On the frame was a small inscription, not to accuse, only to not forget. Time passed, and everyone who had been present on that burning night eventually returned to the old church. Mrs. Mary Ann brought a bundle of dry firewood, placing it next to the plaque, not burning it. Officer Albert placed his worn silver badge on the stone steps. Other figures passed by, their feet touching the ground, their heads bowed low. No one spoke, but that silence for the first time did not weigh heavily on their shoulders. At home, Marla gathered all of Lucy's drawings into a lockable wooden box, carefully labeling it, "Not nightmares, they are evidence, and you don't have to keep them alone anymore." She sealed the box tightly and buried it under the old oak tree in the backyard. Above it, she planted a young mint bush to make the earth smell of peace. When the mint plant began to grow green, Lucy returned to her drawing table, this time drawing the first pictures that no longer showed burning figures, no empty doors, no masks lurking beneath the crayon colors. The sky stretched wide, with grasslands, a hand sowing seeds, light creeping up from the horizon. In the small corner of the drawing, just one sentence, drawn for the first time by myself, not for anyone else. One night, Rachel dreamed of Douglas standing leaning on the church porch. His shadow didn't stretch long on the ground but diffused faintly like mist, his face no longer obscured. When she woke up, she astonishedly touched her shirt. No more ash, no more smell of fire. Rachel met Marla, hesitating. "I think he has seen his friend's true name now. That's enough." The town radio station that year didn't mention the old story again. No one called for costume parties. On Halloween night, the announcer simply ended the program with a heartening sentence. If someone was ever burned, don't call them a demon, call them by the name they never got to speak. That year, no one in town wore costumes, no masks were displayed. Every house placed a white candle on its porch. Children ran around with white papers and crayons. One clung to her mother. "What do I write on this?" The mother gently stroked her hair and replied, "The name of someone you're afraid you've forgotten." At the end of the season, Lucy burned the last drawing. No human figures, just a patch of ash colored with dark pencil covering the entire paper. She burned it, not to erase but to conclude. As the ash floated up to the window, she watched it, whispering softly like rustling grass, "Now he doesn't need me to draw for him anymore, because everyone remembers him now, by name, by drawing, and by not being silent anymore." The wind carried the ash away, and that was the first time, in the smoke, there was no longer fire. There are souls who don't need blood, don't need revenge, and don't demand others die for them. They only need one thing: for someone to remember their true name, for someone to speak what was burned away, for someone to dare to stand in the crowd and not choose silence. If on that Halloween night only one person had kept their conviction, then perhaps there would have been no need for a little girl to draw with nosebleeds to tell what had never been written. You are listening to Whisper Horror Channel, where we don't tell ghost stories, but tell what has been called ghosts. If you find this a story worth telling again, leave a like, a comment, and a share for those who still believe that silence kills no one, because sometimes silence itself is the most terrifying fire in the night. And remember, tomorrow night, when you hear a crayon scratching on paper that no one is touching, don't try to tear it up, because who knows, someone might be trying to redraw their name before ash covers our memories.